I'm here with Jane Rose, the Executive Director of the Meridian Historical Village. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to meet you, and you do wonderful work at the Historical Village.
Thank you. I'm just one of many.
Yeah.
It takes a village to run a village.
It's exactly very true. And you're
Yes.
just across the way, so I love that our proximity, and
Yes.
looking forward to future partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
So please explain what you do for Meridian Township.
Well, being the executive director of the Meridian Historical Village means that I get to have my labor of love teaching history to over 3,000 school children that come through the village every year, and of course working with community groups. And it's just, I always wanted to be a history teacher, and life got in the way. So now I can really focus on that. And with the Historical Village, I mean, we started 44 years ago. There were a lot of people that it took to get it going.
Yeah.
And I stand on their shoulders. And so I have the utmost respect for all of those people who got the village started and had the vision.
Wonderful. What impact do you think women have on the community and the history of Meridian Township?
What impact don't they have?
Right.
Honestly, the bread and butter, might come from the male leaders in the community, but the things that get done behind the scenes, the frosting on the cake, always seems to come under the purview of the women of the community. And in this community, right next to Michigan State University, we have a whole lot of strong, independent, community-minded women that has it's just made Meridian Township a wonderful place to live.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Yes, yes.
Why do you think it's important to celebrate Women's History Month?
Well, without the behind the scenes and the upfront, in your face activity of women, we would not be where we are today. The quality of our life wouldn't be what it is. This community and all communities, really their success is strongly encouraged by the women in the community. As a historian and all of the things that I've studied, that was routinely said back in the Civil War, that the men of the South would have quit a long time before they did, except it was their women folk that said, you keep going.
Women keep it running.
That's right. How can you say no to your mother and your wife and so on? You just keep going.
Yeah. Do you have any stories you can tell us about interactions with prominent women in the community?
Oh gosh, I've been so fortunate, especially through the Historical Village. I mean, I've been involved in other areas in the township, certainly. I worked for the state of Michigan for 32 years, so I've had interactions out here regarding that. But now that I've been at the village, and I've been an employee there for 15 years, but I was a volunteer docent for 5 years before that. So I have 20 years there working with the women that really are the power people behind the township. You think about Carleen Webster Mayer. She was just a powerhouse. One of the people who started the Meridian Historical Village was Elaine Davis, who is still involved. Janice Knox and her husband Tom, they were, in the early group. Janice happened to be the very first woman in this township that served on a school board.
Wow.
She was the first female on a Hazlitt school board.
Wow.
I mean, these are people that really are inspirational. And I know that Sherry mentioned before Luann Maisner, but honestly, I can't toot her horn enough myself. Luann is the director of the Parks and Recreation Department in here. She is just a fireball, spitfire. What other kind of terms can I use for her? Her enthusiasm makes it just a wonderful place to work. And her support of the village, her employees' support of the village, the township board. We have just been so fortunate.
That's wonderful. I always love hearing those stories.
Yes.
So tell us what women in your life have influenced you and why.
Oh my!
Probably
You know,
the same list.
What's that?
It's probably the same list.
Well, that could be, but you know, I really have to give a shout out to my Aunt Peg. She was Margaret Crotty Lynch. Now, I was raised back in the 50s in a very traditional Irish Catholic home. There were two roles for women back then. You got married and you had children, or you became a nun. I didn't want to become a nun. So in my Catholic community, once you got married and you had children, you stayed home. You were the housewife. And your husband took care of you, and that was expected. I mean, it's the June Cleaver period of our history. And my Aunt Peg, who was just the sweetest person, baby of the family, had a wonderful husband by the name of John or Jack Lynch. And he was wonderful, and they had 5 children, and suddenly on May 31st, Memorial Day, he passed away very unexpectedly from a massive heart attack. Now their youngest was still a baby. And I remember my mother getting the phone call. And it kind of turned my world upside down, because up to that point, I was going to be this good Catholic girl that would get married and have children and stay home, and my husband would take care of me and our children, and nothing would go wrong, and everything was secure. And bingo, it wasn't. And that was my wake-up call. I was only 5 at the time.
Wow.
But it was such a family tragedy that it still sticks with me to this day. And my Aunt Peg, as strong as she was, moved the family back to Michigan from Seattle, Washington. She raised her children by herself. She got a job. She worked, you know, with the community. She was very active in the church. And she's the one who really, I don't think she ever knew this, but I thought, what courage it takes in the 50s to be a widowed mother raising 5 children by yourself. And she was so inspirational to me. And so I grew up thinking in the back of my mind, well, even if I do get married and have kids, maybe I won't give up my work. Maybe, you know. And this is during the time when I thought I'd go to college and become a history teacher.
Yeah.
And of course, traditional Irish Catholic family, my mother said, oh no, we have one boy and the boy's going to college. You're not. The girls are not, because they don't need to. So I got a full-time job and I started working, and I worked my own way through college, which gave me more courage.
Yeah.
And then in my career, I started to have female bosses. Some of them were queen bees and maybe weren't the most supportive, but the best bosses I ever had were women who were supportive of other women. And the one who probably made the biggest difference for me was Jacqueline Shin, when I worked for the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation was like stepping back into the 50s. Very, very, very few strong women in leadership at MDOT. I was so blessed to be able to work for her. And she became one of my biggest role models of what you can do, and to not discourage yourself. And I don't know that I would have made it such a success at MDOT if it had not been for Jackie. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately, that little girl, you know, that little girl that I was, growing up in that very sheltered 1950s environment. What would she have thought if somebody had told her back then that she would go to college? She would have a full-time job. She would have a career. When her own marriage ended, she would have the strength, like her aunt did, to raise her children. She would become high up in state government. She would wind up getting the labor of love after her retirement so that she finally could teach history. You know, she would go on to become an author. I keep thinking about that little girl that I remember in the pictures with the big eyes, always looking like, did I just get in trouble? My mother said I was always in trouble.
Oh.
My father always said that's because she's the strong one. So apparently that little girl took those lessons and went with it. And I guess if I can say anything to the girls today, you don't know your strength and you don't know how far you are going to get. Life will get in your way and you'll find your strength, and just don't forget that.
Gosh, you are such an inspiration.
Thank you.
Just listening to your story, it's incredible.
Thank you.
And I also think about that little girl, and she would be amazed.
She would be amazed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Oh, you're
talking with
welcome.
me today.
This has been lovely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.